Howdy, howdy, howdy. My name is Anashi Sasuke, and welcome to the Warhammer 40K Wiki. So, the reason this is happening is because a couple years ago, one of my friends exposed me to Warhammer 40K. A different friend exposed me to it even further back than that, but they stopped talking to me before I ever got to ask them what it was. So, the other friend showed me some YouTube videos about it, and I thought it was interesting, and I would have liked to play, except it's super expensive. But I believe they said 10th edition is starting soon and it's going to get easier to play, so I figured I'd educate myself. But since reading wiki seems to be the like a third of my whole channel, I figured I'd educate myself where everybody can see it so that I sound stupid for the world to see. I was going to just go through the timeline and then click on things in the timeline to read more about them, but the page for the timeline's not built in such a way that I can do that in a way that makes sense. My friend recommended that I start with the history of Terra, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the timeline until I hit the Age of Man, or whatever they call it, and then go to another tab up here, which I forgot that the Opera browser doesn't just bring things down when you aim up at it. And I'm using the Opera browser because I don't know if you guys have used the fandom website, but the way this website slings ads at you, it's damn near a virus. So I'm using the ad blocker for Opera just so that I can be on this website and live. Now, anyway, so the timeline of the 40K universe, it starts with the Chrono Strife and then the prehistory, which is why I was going to go through it anyway, and I don't know if I should, like, read the setup of the article. I'm not going to read the setup of the article. It sounds like that's just stuff about why the page is the way it is, but I'm going to read the Chrono Strife, the prehistory, and then bounce over to another tab about Terra. And looking at how long this page is and then how long that page is, if this ends up being a single video, it's gonna be long and probably less interesting than the other people who do Warhammer videos for a living, because I'm not doing Warhammer videos for a living. I'm just doing it. So anyway, that's enough run on my mouth. Let's check out this here Chrono Strife. It's a bitter ongoing internal conflict within the Inquisition's Ordo Chronos over the Imperium of Man's standard dating system that occurred during the era Indomitus. Indomitus. I think I added too many syllables. It's gonna be like that. Sometime after his resurrection in the 13th Black Crusade, Gilliman, the Lord Commander of the Imperium, Imperial Region, and Primarch of the Ultramarines, was intent on making a full and accurate accounting of the Imperium's fragmentary and often contradictory history, the truth of which would inevitably help humanity's advancement out of the darkness that had befallen it in the millennia after the Horus Heresy. I'm not sure if that page about the Age of Man is going to cover all that too, because the Horus Heresy could be its own set of episodes, I know that much. That's not getting covered in one video, not the way I do it. For this task, Guilliman was, or I believe it's Guilliman, it might be Gilman, but there's no pronunciations in here, so, well, created the small imperial organization known as the Logos Historica Verita, formed from individuals of an inquisitive and liberal nature. After training them personally in objective methods of data collection, the Primarch assigned them the daunting task of discovering, collating, and cataloging thousands of standard years of human history that had been lost or was woefully inaccurate due to superstition, suppression, or purposeful obfuscation by the High Lords of Terra. Because it be like that. Humanity in the Warhammer 40K, humanity is nothing if not corrupt as hell. Let's see. But the monumental task he had set before them was made all the more daunting when the Primarch discovered that even the Emperor's calendar had not survived the millennia intact. During the Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy, the standard imperial dating system had provided some idea of the order of events over time, but like everything else the Emperor had created, the calendar had become degraded by both dogmatic adherence and thoughtless revisionism. Which is to say, religion changed things. But we're used to that. Various rival dating systems had evolved from the Imperial standard, making a true chronicle of the human settled galaxy almost impossible to construct. As the first phase of the Indomitus Crusade drew to a close sometime around what had originally been believed to be something in the 42nd millennia, Guilliman calculated the current year by the 5 main factional variants of the imperial calendar to be anywhere between the early 41st century millennium AD and an entire millennium later, and that was leaving out the numerous lesser, more heretical interpretations. Guilliman had been hoping to find a solution to the Imperium's tortured dating system, he had instead found there was none. It was something else that would ultimately require his personal attention to repair. As a result, all dates mentioned below in the millennia after the Horus Heresy should be considered only approximations, and for many, the 41st millennia has not yet come to a close. From scanning through this a little bit, trying to figure out where I should actually be starting this video, it does sound like some of the stuff that's going to get talked about could also have been its own stuff. So I'm still going to try to mainly focus on the Terra things first after I finish the prehistory like was recommended to me. But it does look like if I was doing it the way I was going to do it, I would have swerved off to see what the Star Gods are, and then swerved off to see what the Satan are, and then the Old Ones, and then the Necrons. I'm vaguely aware of what the deal is with the Necrons, but I learned about it like almost a year ago. 6 months. Same thing. No, it's not. Anyway, the birth of the Star Gods. The birth of the entities known as the Star Gods occurred at the same time as the moment of creation itself, as they formed from the vast, insensate energies first unleashed by that churning mass of cataclysmic force. In that anarchic interweaving of matter and energy, the sea of stars began to swirl into existence, and for an eon, the universe was nothing more than hot hydrogen gas and light elemental dust, ruled over by the gravitic force of billions of newborn suns. Long before the first planets had formed and cooled, the very first truly self-aware beings emerged into the universe, their thoughts encased within the lines of force produced by the plasma and electromagnetic flares of the stars themselves. In later times, these entities would become known as the Satan, but early in their existence they were nothing like the malevolent beings they would eventually become. Okay, so the Star Gods are not good. They were little more than monstrous energy parasites that suckled upon the solar energy of the stars that had brought them into existence, shortening the lives of otherwise main sequence stars by millions of standard years. Yeah, they don't sound good at all. In time, these star vampires learned that is a cooler name than star gods. Star vampires learned to move on the diaphanous wings of the universe's electromagnetic flux, leaving their birthplaces to drift through the cosmic ether to new stellar feeding grounds and began their cycle of stellar destruction once more. Beings of pure energy, they paid no mind to the hunks of solid matter they passed in the vacuum of space, the blazing geothermal fires and weak geomagnetic fields of those nascent planets, insufficient to be worth feeding even their ravenous hunger. Okay. Nothing in that sounded like star gods. That was just, like, sun-sucking monsters, it sounds like. Anyway, the old ones. Just as the stars gave birth to their children, so the planets of the newborn Milky Way galaxy. Why did it immediately go to the Milky Way galaxy? You trying to tell me that the universe spawned from where Earth is? Nah. But the Imperium of Man are the ones writing this, so eventually gave birth to life forms composed of matter which began their long evolutionary climb to self-awareness. The first sentient beings of the galaxy known to have developed a civilization technologically advanced enough to cross the stars was a reptilian species of beings later called the Old Ones by the Eldari. Get out of here. Who knew them best of all their creations. That's a weird way to say that. They possessed a slow, cold-blooded, but still deep wisdom, having long studied the stars and raised astronomy and physics to such a level that their science and technology appear now to humanity like an arcane art. Their understanding of the workings of the universe were such that they could manipulate alternate dimensions and undertake great works of psychic engineering. Their science allowed them to cross the vast gulfs of space with only a single step through the myriad warp gates they built to connect the worlds of the galaxy in a vast network much like the Eldari's webway of today, though on a much larger scale. So I have to assume something bad happened to them because humans are kind of stupid in comparison to them. The Old Ones spread their spawn to many places in the galaxy, but they also knew that all life was precious. Where they passed, they seeded new intelligent species and reshaped thousands of worlds to make them their own, according to the predetermined environmental and geographic criteria. It is believed by some in the Adeptus Mechanicus that even Terra felt the Old Ones touch long before humanity's rise to self-awareness, though this notion is considered heretical at best by the ecclesiarchy, as the Imperial Creed teaches that mankind was made in the image of the God Emperor before his spirit was incarnated in physical flesh millennia ago. Yeah. Good old not having religion humans. The Old One civilization reached its height in excess of 60 million standard years ago. The Old Ones were responsible for the creation or genetic advancement of most of the currently active intelligent species of the galaxy, including the Eldari, the Krork, the Orc's precursors, the Slan, and the Jakaro? Though it is unknown if they played any direct role in the evolution of humanity. The Old Ones were potent psychics who routinely used the powers of the warp for a wide variety of technological applications. The Old Ones constructed a system of instantaneous, faster-than-light portals through warp space that were ultimately adapted to create the Eldari Webway, and was its more advanced precursor. These portals connected all of the Old Ones' colony worlds across vast swaths of interstellar space. Now we reach the Necron tier and the Wars of Secession. Now that I've said it out loud the right way, I'm like, oh, I know that word. I've just never seen it written out like that. The humanoid species that would become the Necrons began their existence under a fearsome scourging star in the far reaches of the galaxy known as the Halo Stars region, billions of standard years before humanity evolved on Terra. Assailed at every moment by ionizing solar winds and intense radiation storms, the flesh and blood species known as the Necrontyr became a morbid people whose precarious lifespans were riven by constant loss. What little information the Imperium of Man has recovered on the Necrontyr tells that their lives were short and uncertain, their bodies blighted and consumed at an early age by the terrible cancers and other illnesses linked to the high levels of ionizing radiation given off by their sun. Well, that sucks. Necron-tier cities were built in anticipation of their inhabitants' early demise, as the living were only brief residents scratching their daily livelihoods in the shadow of the vast sepulchres and tombs of their ancestors. Likewise, their ruling dynasties were founded on the anticipation of demise, and the living were thought of as no more than temporary residents hurrying through the more permanent and lasting structures raised to honor the dead. I was going to say something and then was like, no, that's a stupid thing to say. I know better than that. On the Necrontyr homeworld, the greatest monuments were always built for the dead, never the living. Driven by necessity, the Necrontyr escaped their crucible prison and struck out for the stars, hopeful of carving an empire in which they could realize their species' potential free from the lethal energies of their birth star. Unable to find peace on their own world, the Necrontyr blindly groped outward into the universe to explore other stars. Using stasis crypts and slow-moving antimatter-powered torch ships that were clad in the living metal known as necrodermis. To resist the millennia-long journeys through the void, the Necrontyr began to colonize distant worlds. Little by little, the Necrontyr dynasty spread even further, until much of the ancient Milky Way galaxy answered to their rule. From the earliest days, the rulers of individual Necrontyr dynasties were themselves governed by the Triarch, a council composed of 3 pharaons. The head of the Triarch was known as the Silent King, for he addressed his subjects only through the other 2 pharaons who ruled alongside him. Nominally a hereditary position, the uncertain lifespans of the Necrontyr ensured that the title of Silent King nonetheless passed from one royal dynasty to another many times. The final days of the Necrontyr Empire occurred in the reign of Cesaric, the last of the Silent Kings. Sometime during their slow expansion, the Necrontyr encountered an ancient species far older than any other in existence in the known galaxy. Collectively, these beings were known as the Old Ones, and they were absolute masters of forms of energy the Necrontyr could not even conceive of, yet alone wield. The Old Ones had long ago conquered the secrets of immortality, yet they refused to share the gift of eternal life with the Necrontyr, who yet bore the curse of the bitter star they had been born under. The colonization of much of the galaxy by the reptilian mystics had been immeasurably swifter and more expansive than that of the Necrontyr because of their warp gates and mastery of the Immaterium. That and the old one's incredibly long, if not downright immortal lifespans, kindled a burning, jealous rage in the Necrontyr, which aided their culture spiritually as much as their physical cancers consumed their bodies. The Necrontyr were astonished to learn that another intelligent species enjoyed such long lives while their own were cut so brutally short. But as time wore on, further strife came to the Necrontyr. Each dynasty of the Necrontyr sought to claim its own destiny, and soon the great houses were engaged in all-out conflicts known as the Wars of Succession. Had circumstances remained as they were, for but a generation more, it is possible that the Necrontyr would have wiped themselves out, as so many species had before them and shall do in the future. As their territory grew even wider and more diverse, the unity that had made them strong was eroded, and bitter wars were waged as entire realms fought to win independence. Ultimately, the Triarch, the ruling council of the Necrontyr Empire, realized that the only hope of unity lay in a conflict with an external enemy, but there were few who could prove a credible threat to the technologically advanced Necrontyr. Only the Old Ones, the first of all the galaxy's known sentient species, were a prospective foe powerful enough to bind the feuding Necrontyr dynasties to a common cause. Such a war was simplicity itself to justify, for the Necrontyr had ever rankled at the Old Ones' refusal to share the secrets of eternal life. So did the Triarch declare war on the Old Ones. Yeah, I'm sure that went nicely. At the same time, they offered amnesty to any secessionist Necrontyr dynasties who willingly returned to the fold of the Triarch. Thus lured by the spoils of victory and the promise of immortality, these separatist Necrontyr realms abandoned their wars of succession, and what was later known as the War in Heaven began. It was the last of the Silent Kings who headed the Triarch of the Necrontyr Empire, Cesaric, who formulated the plan that would change everything forever and have consequences that would echo through the history of the galaxy for countless millions of Terran years. Millions? Okay, sure, millions. In a typically bitter act of jealousy and resentment for the Necrontyr race, it was the Silent King who used the Old One's refusal to share the secret of immortality as a pretext for war, forcibly uniting the entire Necrontyr species under the rule of the Triarch against their common foe. War erupted across the stars, yet while the Silent King succeeded in uniting his hateful people, it was a war the Necrontyr could not win, not on their own. The mechanical horror of the Necrons. The War in Heaven. The terrible wars of the Old Ones and the Necrontyr that followed, known later in Aldari myth as the War in Heaven. How many times do you want to say that? It would fill a library in their own right, but the Necrontyr could never win. Their superior technology, superior technology was consistently outmaneuvered. Okay. By the Old Ones thanks to their mastery of the webway portals and warp gates. The Necrontyr were pushed back until they were little more than an irritation to the Old Ones' dominance of the galaxy, a quiescent threat clinging to their irradiated world among the Halo stars, exiled and forgotten. The Necrontyr's fury was cooled by their long millennia of imprisonment on their homeworld, slowly transforming into an utter hatred towards all other forms of intelligent life and an implacable determination to avenge themselves upon their seemingly invincible enemies. So it sounds like the reason the Necrons hate all life is because the Old Ones were who they met first and the Old Ones were kind of dicks. But in the face of defeat, did I miss something? No, I got it. But in the face of defeat, the always fragile unity of the Necrontyr began to fracture once more. No longer did the prospect of a common enemy have any hold over the disparate dynasties. Scores of generations had now lived and died in the service of an unwinnable war, and many Necrontyr dynasties would have gladly sued for peace with the Old Ones if the ruling Triarch had permitted it. Thus began the second iteration of the Wars of Succession, more widespread and ruinous than any that had come before. So fractured had the Necrontyr dynasties become by then that had the Old Ones been so inclined, they could have wiped out their foes with ease. Faced with the total collapse of their rule, the Triarch searched desperately for a means of restoring order. In this, their prayers were answered, though the price for their species will be incalculably high. It was during the reign of the Silent King, Cesaric, that the godlike energy beings known as the Satan first blighted the Necrontyr. It is impossible to say for certain how the Necrontyr first made contact with the Satan, though many misleading, contradictory, and one-sided accounts of these events exist. The dusty archives of the tomb world of Solemnase claim it was but an accident, a chance discovery made by a stellar probe during the investigation of a dying star. The Book of Mournful Night, held under close guard in the Black Library's innermost sanctum, tells rather that the raw hatred that the Necrontyr held as a species for the Old Ones sang out across space, acting as a beacon that the Satan could not ignore. I thought they ate stars, why would they care about hatred? Another account claims that from the earliest days of their civilization, Necrontyr scientists had been deeply engaged in stellar studies to try and understand and protect themselves from their own sun's baleful energies. After long, bitter centuries of searching for some power to unleash upon the Old Ones, the Necrontyr researchers used stellar probes to discover unusual electrodynamic anomalies in the oldest dying stars of the galaxy. In the complex skeins of the energetic plasma of these suns, the Necrontyr found a sentience that was more ancient than that of any of the corporeal species in creation, including the Old Ones, entities of pure energy that had spawned during the birth of the stars eons before. These entities had little conception of what the rest of the universe entailed when the Necrontyr first found them, feeding upon the solar flares and magnetic storms of those bloated red giants. Here was the weapon that the Necrontyr had long sought to bring about the downfall of the Old Ones, beings they believed were the progeny of the death god they worshipped. Howsoever first contact occurred, the shadow of the Satan fell over the oldest Necrontyr dynasties first. The power of these starborn creatures was incredible. The raw energy of the stars made animate, and the Necrontyr called them the Satan, or star gods in their tongue. Okay, so that's how they became known as the Star Gods, because that's what the Necrontyr called them, not because that's what they were. They're star vampires. The Satan were dispersed across areas larger than whole planets. Their consciousness is too vast for humanoids to comprehend. How the Necrontyr ever managed to communicate with them is unknown to the Adeptus Mechanicus. Understanding that such diffuse minds could never perceive the material universe without manifesting themselves in a material form, some Necrontyr actively sought the Satan's favor and oversaw the forging of physical shells for the Satan to occupy, cast from the living metal called necrodermis that they had once used for their colony torch ships. Fragmentary Aldari legends tell of translucent streamers of electromagnetic force shifting across space as the star vampires coiled into their new bodies in the physical realm across an incorporeal bridge of starlight. Thus clad, the Satan took the physical shapes of the Necrontyr's half-forgotten gods, hiding their own true desires beneath cloaks of obsequious subservience. Incomprehensible forces were compressed into the living metal of the necrodermis bodies, which the Necrontyr had forged at the full power of the Satan at last found form. As the Satan focused their consciousnesses and became ever more aware of their new mode of existence, they came to appreciate the pleasures available to beings of matter and the other realities of corporeal life. The deliciously focused trickles of electromagnetic energy given off by the physical bodies of the Necrontyr all about them awakened a new hunger in the Satan, very unlike the one they had once sated using the nourishing but essentially tasteless energies of the stars. So it was that one of the Satan came before the Silent King Cesaric, acting as forerunner to the coming of his brothers. Amongst its own kind, this Satan was known as the Deceiver, for it was willfully treacherous. Yet the Silent King knew not of the Satan's true nature, and instead granted the creature an audience. The Deceiver spoke of a war, fought long before the birth of the Necrontyr, between the Satan and the Old Ones. It was a war, he said, that the Satan had lost. In the aftermath, and fearing the vengeance of the Old Ones, he and his brothers had hidden themselves away, hoping one day to find allies with whom they could finally bring the Old Ones to account. In return for his aid, the Deceiver assured he and his brothers would deliver everything that the Necrontyr craved. Unity could be theirs once again, and the immortality that they had sought for so long would finally be within their grasp. No price would there be for these great gifts, the Deceiver insisted, for they were but boons to be bestowed upon valued allies. Thus did the Deceiver speak, and who can say how much of his tale was truth? It is doubtful whether even the Deceiver knew, for trickery had become so much a part of its existence that even the Satan could no longer divine its root. Yet his words held sway over Cesaric, who, like his ancestors before him, despaired of the divisions that were tearing his people apart. For long solar months, he debated with the matter with the other two pharaohs of the Triarch and the nobles of his royal court. Through it all, the only dissenting voice was that of Oricon, the court astrologer, who foretold that the alliance between Necrontyr and the Satan would bring about a renaissance of glory, but destroy forever the soul of the Necrontyr people. Yet, desire and ambition swiftly overrode caution, and Oricon's prophecy was dismissed. A Necrontyr year after the deceiver had presented his proposition, the Triarch agreed to the alliance and so forever doomed their species. For their part, the Necrontyr soon fell into awe of their discoveries, and the Satan moved to take control over their benefactors. Powers of the Satan manifested in the physical world were indeed almost godlike, and it was not long before the Satan were being worshipped as the star gods the Necrontyr had named them. Perhaps they had been tainted by the material universe they had become a part of, or perhaps this had always been their nature even when they were bound to the suns they fed upon. But the Satan proved to be as cruel and capricious as the stars from which they had been born. They soon reveled in their religious worship of the Necrontyr and feasted upon the electromagnetic life energies of countless mortal slaves. So it sounds like what happened was the Necrontyr were like, hey, we need help fighting the old ones because they won't let us be immortal like they are because our sun kills us. And the star vampires were like, huh? What? Okay, whatever, sure, why not? So they rolled up, and the Necrontyr were like, hey, want some physical bodies? And they're like, sure, we guess. And then they got into the physical bodies like, yo, this is a pretty nice fit you got here. Also, that's some tasty hatred you got going on. How about let's tell them we're going to help with this war against the old gods, sprinkle a little bit of lies, say we also hate the old gods, and then eat their souls. That's what I'm if I'm picking up what they're putting down. The Necrontyr hated the old ones so much that they made the star vampires crave souls. Like, I know that the Imperium of Man makes some bad decisions, but I don't think they made anybody become soul eaters. So they got that going for them. Anyway, biotransference and the rise of the Necrons. When the Silent King saw what had been done, he knew at last the true nature of the Satan, and of the doom they had wrought in his name. Except from the Book of Mournful Night, and this picture here says, the Necron forces on the march during the ancient war in heaven after biotransference. Okay, so how'd this go down? Armed with the weapons of godlike power and starships that could cross the galaxy in the blink of an eye through the use of quantum phase technology, the Necrontyr stood ready to begin their war against the old ones anew. Why were the Satan able to provide that if all they did before this point was eat stars? Whatever. But the Satan had another gift for their mortal subjects. They offered the Necrontyr a path to immortality, and the physical stability their species had always craved. Their diseased flesh will be replaced with the living metal of the necrodermis that made up the Star God's own physical forms. Their discarded organic husks would be consumed, and their cold metal forms would then be free to pursue the great vengeance against the old ones and the rest of a hateful universe, freed forever from the weakness of their hated flesh. With the pact between the Necrontyr and Satan sealed, the Star Gods revealed the form that immortality would take for the Necrontyr, and the great biotransference process began. Colossal biofurnaces built by the Necrontyr artifice at the direction of the Satan roared day and night, consuming weak-bodied flesh and replacing it with enduring machine forms of living metal, much like the Satan themselves. As the Cyclopean machines clamored, and the Satan swarmed about the biotransference sites, drinking in the torrent of cast-off life energy and growing ever stronger. Whether the Necrontyr actually realized the price they would actually pay for accepting this pact with the Satan is not known. The immortality the Satan promised would be delivered upon the Necrontyr by way of the arcane and terrible process of biotransference. Vast biofoundries were constructed, and into these the Silent King's peoples marched according to the terms of the pact he had made with the Satan. What blasphemous procedures the Necrontyr were subjected to within the raging biofurnaces cannot be known, but certainly each was stripped of flesh and of soul, their body replaced by a shell of living metal animated by what remained of their guttering self. Above each furnace swooped and dove the ethereal true forms of the Satan as they glutted themselves on the spiritual and electromagnetic detritus of an entire species. It was only when the Silent King himself emerged from the biotransference process and looked upon what had become of his people that he saw the awful truth of the pact he had made. Though immortality and nigh godlike strength and vigor were his, it had come at the cost of his soul, the effluvial remains of which had already been sucked down the gullet of the circling Satan. As Cesaric watched the Satan feast on the life essence of his people, he realized the terrible depth of his mistake. In many ways, he felt better than he had in decades, the countless aches and uncertainties of organic life now behind him. His new machine body was far mightier than the frail form he had tolerated for so long, and his thoughts were swifter and clearer than they had ever been. Yet, there was an emptiness gnawing at his mind, an inexpressible hollowness of spirit that defied rational explanation. In that moment, he knew with cold certainty that the price of physical immortality had been the loss of his soul. With great sorrow, the Silent King beheld the fate he had brought upon his people. The Necrontyr were now but a memory, and the soulless, undying Necrons had been reborn in their place. Yet, if the price had been steep, biotransference had fulfilled all of the promises the Satan had made. Even the lowliest of the Necrontyr was now blessed with immortality. Age and hard ionizing radiation could little erode their new mechanical bodies, and only the most terrible of injuries could destroy them utterly. Likewise, the Necrons now enjoyed a unity that the Necrontyr had never known, though it was achieved through tyranny and the complete loss of individuality and emotion rather than by consent. The biotransference process had embedded command protocols in every Necron mind, granting Cesaric the unswerving loyalty of his subjects. At first, the Silent King embraced this unanimity. I don't think I said that word right, but I'm gonna stop trying. For it was a welcome reprieve from the chaos that had consumed the Necrontyr Empire in recent years. However, as time wore on, he grew weary of his burden, but dared not sever the command protocols, lest his subjects turn on him seeking vengeance for the terrible curse he had visited upon them. Thus the Necrontyr became the Necrons, cursed to the eternal servitude of their star gods. The Satan feasted upon the entire Necrontyr's race's life energies, even as they made their biotransfers, leaving behind only the ghostly echoes of the Necrontyr's consciousnesses. Only a few of the most strong-willed Necrontyr retained their intellect and self-awareness, and even they were but shadows of their former selves. They had been purged of so much of what had made them unique individuals. But unlike the Silent King, most of the Necrons at first cared not at all for their loss. All that mattered to them was that they would live forever without disease or death as their star gods had promised. Nevertheless, the Necrontyr species was united as never before. The process imbued in every one of the Silent King's subjects was the command protocols with which he would rule over them with an iron hand. Necroderma's hand. The entire species was his to command, and so it fell upon the Necrons to honor their side of the terrible bargain. Renewed by their devouring of the souls of an entire species, the Satan were unstoppable, and with the legions of the Necrons marching in their wake, the Old Ones were doomed. Only one thing truly remained of the old Necrontyr, their burning hatred for all the other living intelligent species of the universe. Legions of the undying living metal warriors set out into the galaxy in their tomb ships, and the stars burned in their wake. The Old One's mastery of the warp was now countered by the Satan's supremacy over the physical universe, and the ancient enemies of the Necrons suffered greatly in the interstellar slaughter that followed. Necrons Ascendant. With the Satan and the Necrons fighting as one, the old gods were now doomed to defeat. Glutted on the life force of the Necrontyr, the empowered Satan were nigh unstoppable and unleashed forces beyond comprehension. Planets were razed, suns extinguished, and whole star systems devoured by black holes called into being by the reality-warping powers of the star gods. Necron legions finally breached the webway and assailed the Old Ones in every corner of the galaxy. They brought under siege the fortresses of the Old Ones' many allies amongst the younger intelligent species of the galaxy, harvesting the life force of the defenders to feed their voracious Satan masters. In the closing years of the war in heaven, one of the primary factors that led to the Necrons' ascendancy was their ability to finally gain access to the Old One's webway. The Satan, known as Nyardrazath, the Burning One, had long desired to carry his Eldritch fires into that space beyond space, and so showed the Necrons how to breach its boundaries. Through a series of living stone portals known as the Dolmen Gates, the Necrons were finally able to turn the Old One's greatest weapon against them, vastly accelerating the ultimate end of the war in heaven. The portals offered by the Dolmen Gates are neither so stable nor so controllable as the naturally occurring entrances to the webway scattered across the galaxy. Indeed, in some curious fashion, the webway can detect when its environs had been breached by a Dolmen Gate, and its arcane mechanism swiftly attempted to seal off the infected spur from the rest of the labyrinth dimension until the danger to its integrity had passed. Thus, Necrons entering the webway must reach their intended destination through its shifting extra-dimensional corridors quickly, lest the network itself bring about their destruction. Of course, in the present age, aeons have passed since the Necrons used the Dolmen Gates to assault their arch-enemies. The old ones are gone, and the webway itself has become a tangled and broken labyrinth. Many Dolmen Gates were lost or abandoned during the time of the Necrons' Great Sleep, and many more were destroyed by the Eldari, the Old One's successors as the guardians of the webway. Those that remain grant access to but a small portion of the immense maze that is the webway, much of that voluntarily sealed off by the Eldari to prevent further contamination. Yet the webway is immeasurably vast, and even these sundered skeins allow the Necrons a mode of travel that far outpaces those of the younger races. It is well that this is so. As a species bereft of psychers as a result of the loss of their souls during the biotransference process, the Necrons are also incapable of warp travel, and without access to the webway, they would be forced to rely once more on slow-voyaging stasis ships, dooming them to interstellar isolation. In the wake of these victories, the C'tan and their undying Necron servants now dominated the galaxy. The last planetary bastions of the Old Ones were besieged, and the intelligent species that had once nurtured became cattle for the obscene hunger of the C'tan. To the younger sentient species of the galaxy, the Necrons and their star gods were cruel masters, callously harvesting the populations at will to feed the C'tan's ceaseless hunger. The C'tan were figures of terror who demanded their adoration and fear in equal measure. For unknown reasons, but probably because their individual hungers for mortal life energies knew no bounds, the C'tan ultimately began to fight amongst themselves for both sport and out of spite as they unleashed destructive forces beyond mortal comprehension. Among the Eldari, an ancient myth holds that their laughing god tricked the C'tan known as the Outsider into turning on its brothers and beginning their long war for ascendancy. In the course of the C'tan's struggle against one another, whole planets were razed, stars were extinguished, and whole solar systems were devoured by unleashed black holes. New cities were built by the efforts of millions and then smashed down once more. As the red harvest of the C'tan and their Necron servants grew thin, C'tan eventually devoured C'tan until only a few were left in the universe, and they competed amongst themselves for a long age. Eventually, even the Old Ones, who had once been defiant by their patience and unstoppable will, became desperate in the face of the Necron assault. They used their great scientific skills to genetically engineer intelligent beings with an even stronger psychic link to the warp, hoping to create servants with the capability of channeling psychic power to defend themselves. They nurtured many potential warrior species, among which are believed to be the earliest members of the Eldari species and many other Xenos races, including the Rashan, the Knib, and the Krurk, and many others. Millennia passed as the Old One's creations and experiments finally bore fruit, even as the C'tan and their Necron servants continued to extinguish life across the galaxy. I feel like part of that should have come before another part of that. Like, I think they should have explained the Old Ones making the Xenos races before the paragraph about the C'tan starting to eat each other, but okay, sure. The tide turns. The Old One's psychically empowered servant species spread across the galaxy, battling the advanced Necron technology with the psychic power of their warp-spawned sorcery. Facing this new onslaught, the C'tan's empire was shattered as the psychic forces of the Immaterium were anathema to soulless entities whose existence was wholly contained within purely physical patterns of electromagnetic force. For all the destruction they could unleash, they were unable to stop the Old Ones and the younger races' relentless advance across the stars. The C'tan, unified by this great threat for the first time in millions of Terran years, sought a way to defeat the soul-fueled energies of the younger species. They initiated a great warding, a plan to forever defeat the psychic sorceries of the Old Ones by sealing off the material universe from the warp, a plan whose first fruits could once be found on the Imperial Fortress world of Cadia in the form of the great pylons that lit the surface of that world in intricate networks and create the area of space-time stability near the Eye of Terror known as the Cadian Gate. With their godlike powers, it was only a matter of time until the Satan succeeded, and the greatest work of the Satan was begun. But before it was complete, the seeds of destruction the Old One had planted millennia before brought about an unforeseen cataclysm. The growing pains and collective psychic flaws of the younger species threw the untapped psychically reactive energy of the Immaterium into disorder. War, pain, and destruction were mirrored in the bottomless depth of the sea of souls that was the warp. The maelstrom of souls unleashed into the Immaterium by the carnage of the war in heaven coalesced in the previously formless energies of the warp. Older entities that had existed within the Immaterium transformed into terrifying psychic predators, tearing at the souls of vulnerable psychers as their own environment was torn apart and reforged into the realm of chaos. The Enslaver Plague. Okay. The denizens of the warp clustered voraciously at the cracks between the Immaterium and the material universe, seeking new ways to enter the physical realm. The Old Ones brought forth genetically engineered warrior species to defend their last strongholds, including the technology-mimicking Jakero and the formidable green-skinned Krork, who were the ancestors of the present-day orcs. But it was already too late. The Old Ones' intergalactic webway network was breached from the Immaterium and lost to them. Several of their warp gates destroyed by their own hands to prevent the entities of the warp from spreading to uncorrupted worlds, and the Old Ones' greatest works and places of power were overrun by the horrors their own creations had unleashed. The most terrifying of these horrors were the Enslavers, warp entities whose ability to dominate the minds of the younger species and create their own portals into the material realm using transmuted, possessed psychers brought them forth in even greater numbers. For the Old Ones, this was the final disaster as the Enslavers took control of their servants. The Pandora's box unleashed by the creation of the younger species finally scattered the last of the Old Ones and broke their power over the galaxy once and for all. Life had stood at the edge of an apocalypse during the war in heaven between the Old Ones and the Satan. Now, as the Enslavers breached the Immaterium in epidemic proportions, the survivors looked doomed. Ultimately, beset by the implacable onset of the Satan and the calamitous warp-spawned perils they had themselves mistakenly unleashed, the Old Ones were defeated, scattered, and finally destroyed. Whether the species went extinct, or simply fled the galaxy to seek a new haven elsewhere is unknown. The Silent King's Betrayal. Throughout the final stages of the war in heaven, Cesaric bided his time, waiting for the moment in which the Satan would prove vulnerable. Though the entire Necron race was now his to command, he could not hope to oppose the Satan at the height of their power, and even if he did, and met with success, the Necrons would then have to finish the war in heaven against the Old Ones and their increasingly potent allies alone. No, the Old Ones had to be completely and utterly defeated before the Satan could be brought to account for the horror they had wrought, and so, when the Satan finally won their great war, their triumph proved short-lived. With one hated enemy finally defeated, and the other spent from hard-fought victory, the Silent King at last led the Necrons in a revolt against their Satan masters. In their arrogance, the Satan did not realize the danger until it was too late. The Necrons focused the unimaginable energies of the living universe into weapons too mighty for even the star gods to endure. Alas, the Satan were immortal star spawn, part of the fundamental fabric of reality, and therefore nigh impossible to destroy. So each Satan instead sundered into thousands of smaller and less powerful fragments with a similar energy signature. Yet this was sufficient to the Silent King's goals. Indeed, he had known the Satan's ultimate destruction to be impossible, and had drawn his plans accordingly. Each Satan shard was bound within a multidimensional tesseract labyrinth, as trembled and secured as a Terran djinn trapped in a bottle. Though the cost of victory was high, millions of Necrons had been destroyed as a consequence of the rebellion, including all of the members of the Triarch save the Silent King himself. The Necrons were once more in command of their own destiny. The Great Sleep. The Necrons had been vindicated in their pursuit only of science and control over the material realm, and certainly took pleasure in seeing the Old One civilization collapse as a result of their overindulgence of psychic power and the end of the Satan's domination over their species. Yet, even with the defeat of the Old Ones and the Satan alike, the Silent King saw that the time of the Necrons in the galaxy was over. For the moment, at least. They would allow the Enslavers to take what was left of the sentient life in the galaxy and let it become an interstellar wasteland. The Psyker swarm would then die away, and in time the galaxy would evolve new life forms, who would be less sophisticated and easier to dominate. In addition, the Necrons understood that the mantle of galactic dominion was soon to pass to the Eldari, one of the psychically potent species that had fought alongside the Old Ones throughout the war in heaven, and had thus come to hate the Necrons and all their works with the burning passion that is the defining characteristic of that species. The Eldari had survived where the Old Ones had not, and the Necrons, weakened by their expenditure of lives and resources in overthrowing the rule of the Satan, could not stand against them. Yet the Silent King knew that the time of the Eldari would eventually pass, as it must pass for all those beings still cloaked in the flesh. It would take millions of Terran years for the Eldari's power to fade, but what mattered is that the Necrons would be there to take advantage of it. So it was that the Silent King ordered the remaining Necron cities to be transformed into great tomb complexes threaded with stasis crypts. Let the Eldari shape the galaxy for a time. They were but ephemeral, whilst the Necrons were undying and eternal. The Silent King's final command to his people was that they must sleep for the equivalent of 60 million standard years, but awake ready to rebuild all that they had lost to restore the Necron dynasties to their former glory. This was the Silent King's final order, and as the last tomb world sealed its subterranean vaults, Cesaric destroyed the command protocols by which he had controlled his people for so long, for he had failed them utterly. Without a backwards glance, Cesaric, the last of the Silent Kings of the Triarch, took ship into the starless void of intergalactic space, there to find whatever measure of solace or penance he could. Meanwhile, eons passed, and the Necrons slept on, their machine slaves and constructs guarding them while they slept on tomb worlds that had been purged of all life to keep the enslavers from their door. This plan worked with an amazing degree of success until the Necrons were awakened by the forces of the Imperium of Man in the 41st millennium to plague the galaxy once more. They soon discovered a new and unexpected age of interstellar civilization and war, much like the one they had left behind 60 million years before. The galaxy is blossoming with life once more, but is still overrun with latent psychers and worshippers of the infernal chaos warp energies unleashed during the war in heaven. It will take time and a great many machinations for the Necron dynasties to regain their rightful places as the rulers of the galaxy. The agents of chaos must be overthrown, the dangerous Eldari, inheritors of the Old One's mantle, eliminated, humanity subjugated, and the great work cutting off the material universe from the warp completed before a new age of Necron dominion can truly begin. But the Necrons are ageless and undying. Their technology is still unmatched by any of the younger species, and time is always on their side. So, we now reach the rise of humanity, which would bring me to the other tab for Terra. However, I was not expecting the first chunk of that timeline to take as long as it did. So, I don't know why it went all the way down like that. I think I'm probably going to stop this video here and then cover as much of Terra as I can in another one, because that was only a fraction of how long that actual page was and took almost an hour. I can't imagine trying to read the entirety of Terra is going to be any quicker than that. So, I guess this will be one of those things of seeing whether or not you guys want me to do more of this, because I'll probably read the wiki regardless, because I'm curious and I want to have the information before I ever start trying to play the game, because it's an expensive game to get into to not know what's going on. But if y'all want to see more of me read this long website, which was of course written by British people because that's where this game comes from, and that's why some of the words look like that, then let me know in the comments. And if you don't want to see that, I'll be able to tell from the analytics. So you don't really have to say anything if you don't want to see more. I'll just see that the video only got 4 views in 4 weeks, and that'll tell me everything I need to know. So if you liked it, a like and a subscribe will be groovy. If you didn't, you don't need to do either one of those things. If you want to click the bell, you can do that as well so that you're notified of future uploads, and I will see y'all in the next video. Later.